please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Kevin Martin. I'm 35 years old, a geologist working for a mineral company in Denver, Colorado. If you ask me where I'm from, I'd tell you a small town called Havenfield, nestled alone amid the golden wheat fields of Nebraska. But if you ask me where I truly belong, I'd only shake my head, because the answer isn't simple. I've spent most of my life searching for a place to call home, somewhere free from the stench of cheap liquor, the sound of shouting, or the bruises I once thought were just a normal part of childhood. Today, sitting here looking out the window of my warm home, I want to tell you my story. A story of how a boy who grew up in pain somehow found light, even though the path was filled with dark twists. Havenfield wasn't the kind of town you'd see on postcards. It was small, weathered, with a few bumpy main streets and a single bar that was always busier than the church. My house stood on the very edge of town, a faded two-story wooden structure with peeling shingles and windows always shut tight to hide the secrets within. My father, Spencer Martin, was a mechanic, but he rarely worked. My mother, Mira, used to be a cashier but quit when I was 5, saying nobody needed her out there. Both were alcoholics, drinking cheap, strong liquor from the corner store. The alcohol made them laugh, made them cry, and sometimes made them fight, or worse, made them turn on me and my siblings. I was the eldest, born when my parents were still young and dreaming of a better life. But those dreams faded quickly, like steam rising from a hot cup of coffee. After me came Dylan, 10 years younger, a blonde-haired boy with blue eyes who looked at me like I was some kind of hero. And then there was Logan, the youngest, only 2 years old when I began to realize our family wasn't like the ones in storybooks. I loved my siblings more than anything, and I did everything I could to protect them, even if it meant taking on more pain myself. My childhood didn't have picnics or shiny new bicycles. It was sleepless nights curled up in bed, listening to the sound of breaking bottles and my mother's screams as my father lost another bet in a card game. I remember the first time I realized I was different. I was 7, and my elementary school teacher, Miss Harper, kept me after class. "Kevin," she said, her voice gentle but filled with concern. "Are you okay? Your collar, it's torn, and there's a bruise on your arm." Miss Harper asked, her voice gentle, worried, but careful not to frighten me. I looked down at my arm, where the dark bruise had spread like a storm cloud, ugly and raw. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I fell playing ball, ma'am." I lied. Her eyes met mine, searching, sad. She didn't believe me, I could tell, but she didn't press further. Even at that young age, I knew no one could help me. No one dared step into that house, where even sunlight seemed reluctant to enter. My father wasn't always cruel. On rare days, when he was sober, he'd sit on the porch steps and tell stories about our Irish ancestors, resilient farmers who survived famine and war. "Martin blood is warrior blood," he'd say, a spark of something proud gleaming in his tired eyes. I cherished those moments because they made me feel like he was still a father, a real father. But then he'd pick up the bottle again, and that father would disappear, replaced by a stranger whose fists were faster than his words. My mother was different. She didn't hit me, but somehow, her indifference hurt worse. When I was 10, I brought home a drawing that my teacher had praised. I stood there, so hopeful, holding it out to her. "Look, Mom," I said. Miss Harper said it was really good. She barely looked up, her voice flat. No room in this house for useless things. Then she turned away, like I wasn't even there. I stood frozen, the drawing shaking in my hands, my heart crushed. But I didn't hate her, I couldn't. I just wanted her to see me, truly see me, even once. I wouldn't let those things destroy me. I found solace in books. The town library, with its creaky wooden floors and the scent of old paper, became my hiding place, my sanctuary. I read everything I could get my hands on, adventure stories, science books, anything to escape. That's where I discovered geology. I was fascinated by the stories of rocks, mountains, minerals hidden deep within the earth. The idea that the earth, though scarred and battered, could hold precious secrets inside. Maybe I was like that, too. Wounded on the outside, but with something valuable buried deep down. As the eldest, I learned how to be a shield. When my father got angry, I'd grab Dylan and Logan, pull them into my room, lock the door, and tell them stories to drown out the shouting. "We'll leave this place," I'd promise, my voice steady even if my hands shook. "We'll have a beautiful house, with a green lawn and windows always open." Dylan would nod, his eyes shining, desperate to believe, and Logan would cling to me so tight, as if he was scared I might vanish. I wasn't making empty promises. I believed it. I had to, because otherwise, I don't know how I would have survived. When I was 15, things got worse. When my father lost his job at the auto shop, after getting drunk and screaming at his boss in front of customers, things went from bad to worse. Money dried up, and the beatings came more often. One night, I remember, Dylan accidentally broke a glass. My father's face twisted into something monstrous, and before I could stop him, he lunged at Dylan. "Dad, don't!" I shouted, stepping in front of my brother. He turned on me, rage in his eyes. "Out of the way, boy." When I didn't move, he shoved me so hard I crashed onto the wooden floor, my back slamming against it. The boards were cold against my skin, and my heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. For a second, I thought he might kill me. His hand was raised, ready to strike, but then he froze, like he'd suddenly remembered he still had somewhere else to be. Without another word, he stumbled out of the house and into the night, leaving me lying there gasping for breath. Dylan ran to me, crying, "Kevin, are you okay?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break it." I pulled him close, hugging him tight. "It's not your fault," I whispered. "Everything's going to be okay. I promise." But deep down, I knew I couldn't just keep hoping. I needed a plan. I started working after school, newspaper deliveries in the mornings, cleaning floors at the grocery store on weekends. Every cent I earned went into an old tin box I buried under a crooked elm tree in the backyard. That box wasn't just money. It was hope. It was a promise I'd made to Dylan and Logan that one day we'd leave. At night, after the house went quiet, I'd study by flashlight because the electricity was often cut off. My textbooks were worn and stained, but I treated them like treasures. My science teacher saw something in me. One afternoon, she pulled me aside after class. "Kevin," she said, putting a gentle hand on my shoulder, "you're capable of great things. Fly high, fly far. Don't let this place hold you back." Her words lit a small flame in me, enough to keep me going through the longest, coldest nights. But I wasn't always strong. Sometimes, when the house was silent and everyone was asleep, I'd sit alone and wonder if I really deserved a better life. Because, even after everything, I still loved my parents. I remembered my mother's lullabies when I was little, and how my father once showed me how to throw a ball in the yard. Those memories hurt, because they reminded me of what we could have been, of what we'd lost. When I turned 18, I received a full scholarship to study geology at a university in Colorado. It was the moment I dreamed of for years, the key to my freedom. When I told my parents, my mother gave me a weak smile. "That's good, Kevin," she said, though her eyes looked far away. My father just grunted. "Don't think you're better than me just because you're going to college." I didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. I packed my few things, a couple of shirts, a pair of jeans, and hugged Dylan and Logan tight. "I'll come back for you," I promised them, my voice steady even though my chest ached. Then I left Havenfield without looking back. As the bus rumbled down the highway, the endless wheat fields blurred outside the window. I didn't cry, but my heart felt like it was breaking. I wasn't just leaving my parents behind. I was leaving a piece of myself. The boy who still hoped his family might someday be whole. My luggage for starting my college journey was just a backpack with a few clothes in it and the tin box holding my savings. My destination was the University of Colorado in Boulder, where I'd received a full scholarship to study geology. It felt both freeing and terrifying, like stepping out on a tightrope stretched between the past and the future. Stepping into Boulder was like landing on another planet. There was no stale smell of cigarette smoke, no shouting, no neighbors peeking through curtains to see what the Martin family was screaming about this time. Instead, there were tree-lined streets, the red brick buildings of the university, and fresh air so clean it made me want to breathe until my chest hurt. But I still felt out of place. My classmates wore brand new jackets, told stories about summer vacations in Europe, or ski trips with their parents. I hid in my worn-out sweater and borrowed textbooks from the library, praying no one would notice how poor I was. The scholarship paid for tuition and a dorm room, but everything else was on me. So I took any job I could find, washing dishes in the cafeteria, shoveling snow in the winter, even delivering pizza late at night. Some days, I only slept 3 hours. I didn't complain. Every dollar I saved was a step closer to keeping my promise to Dylan and Logan. Whenever I could, I sent money home, though deep down I knew most of it would end up fueling my parents' drinking. I wrote letters to my brothers, describing the mountains in Boulder, the rocks I found on field trips, promising them that one day I'd bring them here. Dylan would reply in a shaky scrawl. "I'm okay, Kevin," he wrote. "Logan's okay too." Sometimes Logan would send me drawings, stick figures of houses, and bright smiling suns. Each letter from them felt like a knife, reminding me they were still trapped in Havenfield. Geology became my anchor. In class, I was completely drawn in by lectures about volcanic eruptions or rocks that had survived millions of years, carrying the secrets of the earth. On field trips, I loved running my fingers along their rough surfaces, trying to read their stories. My professor, Dr. Bennett, a tall, lanky man with glasses always slipping down his nose, noticed my fascination one day in the Rockies. You have an eye for it, Kevin, he told me, studying the rock I'd picked up. Rocks don't lie, but they tell stories to those who listen. His words meant more than he knew. For the first time, I felt valuable, like maybe I wasn't just that broken boy from Havenfield, but someone who could do something worthwhile. Still, the scars from my past clung to me. Loud voices made me flinch. A friend brushing against my shoulder would make me shrink back, my mind flashing to fists and broken glass. I was terrified people would find out about my family, about the screaming, the bruises, the hopelessness. When people asked about my parents, I'd keep it vague. They're just normal, I'd say quickly, before changing the subject. I built a wall around myself, afraid to let anyone see past it, afraid they'd turn away if they saw the truth. Then I met Sienna. It was the spring of 2011, when I was 21 and a junior in college. I went to the university library to borrow a book on mineralogy, and there she was, standing behind the counter with her brown hair tied up high, eyes as blue as the Colorado sky. She smiled when I handed her my worn-out library card, and I fumbled, awkward as always with words. "Thank you," I stammered. She glanced at the book in her hands, then back at me with a curious grin. "You like rocks, huh?" I nodded, embarrassed. She continued, her voice soft, easy. "I used to think they were just rocks, but once I saw a piece of rose quartz. It was beautiful, like a dream." Her words, so gentle and non-judgmental, made something inside me relax, like I could finally breathe. That was Sienna. We started dating slowly, naturally. Sienna was unlike anyone I'd ever met, smart, funny, and full of hope, as if the world could be repaired if you just cared enough. She took me hiking in the mountains near Boulder, where we'd sit on boulders and watch the sunset set fire to the sky. I'd tell her about mineral deposits, explaining how lithium, the metal in such high demand for electric car batteries, was hidden deep underground. She'd laugh and tease me. "So you love rocks more than me, huh?" I'd grin, and she'd catch my eye, letting me know she understood, that she saw me, the real me. With Sienna, I wasn't the broken boy from Havenfield. I was Kevin, a man with dreams, someone worthy of love. At 23, I graduated with my geology degree and landed a job at a mineral exploration company in Denver. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and start putting money away for Dylan and Logan. Sienna found a job working at a public library in Denver, and we began to dream of a future together, a small house, bookshelves crammed with stories, a garden where she could grow flowers. For the first time, happiness felt within reach. But the past wouldn't let go so easily. I stayed in touch with Dylan and Logan, but my parents started calling more and more, always demanding money. "You're working now," my father rasped over the phone one night, half drunk and angry. "You've got to take care of the family." I sent them money, knowing full well it would be turned into cheap liquor. I couldn't turn my back on them, not because I still loved them, but because I was terrified they'd take it out on Dylan and Logan if I didn't. Sienna noticed the stress. She'd watch me pace the apartment after those calls, but I never told her the full truth. I didn't want her to see that weak part of me, the part still chained to Havenfield. Then, when I was 25, she brought it up. "Kevin," she said softly one night, reaching for my hand, "I want to meet your family." I froze. The thought of her stepping into that faded wooden house, hearing my parents' vicious arguments, it made my stomach twist. "Sienna, I don't think that's a good idea," I whispered. She squeezed my hand, steady and patient as always. "Kevin, I love you, not your past. I just want to understand you more." I agreed, though my heart pounded with fear the entire drive. We went to Havenfield that weekend, Sienna holding my hand to steady me. The house was the same as I remembered, maybe worse. The siding was peeling, the front steps sagging. When we stepped inside, the familiar sour smell of cheap liquor hit me so hard I nearly gagged. My father was slouched in his usual armchair, a bottle in hand, already too drunk to stand straight. My mother glared at Sienna like she was an intruder come to steal something. Dylan, now 15, wrapped his arms around me and held on tight. "Kevin," he whispered, voice shaky, "you're here." Logan looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. There was something in his stare that cut me deeper than any words, like he blamed me for leaving him behind. Sienna tried. She really did. She spoke to my mother, asked gentle questions about the house, about how they were doing. My mother barely answered. Her voice clipped, suspicion in every word. The air was so heavy I could hardly breathe, and all I wanted was to get Sienna out of there before she saw any more. When we finally left, she didn't say a word. She just held my hand so tight. Back on the road, I stared straight ahead, ashamed, choking on apologies. "I'm sorry, Sienna," I said. "I'm so sorry you had to see that." She shook her head, firm and loving. "You don't have to apologize for them, Kevin," she told me. "You've done so much better than they ever did." That night, Back in my tiny apartment, she held me close as I cried, really cried, for the first time in years. I let it all out, the fear, the guilt, the weight of my whole childhood. Sienna didn't flinch. She stayed. And I knew right then I wanted to spend my life with her. I started thinking about a ring, about proposing, even though my bank account was practically empty. I didn't care. I wanted a family with Sienna, a real family, nothing like the chaos I'd been raised in. But just when I thought everything was finally coming together, a call from my father shattered it all. It was a winter evening, cold, the wind rattling the windows. My phone buzzed, and his slurred voice poured through the line. "Kevin," he rasped, "you need to come home. It's important." My stomach sank. "What's wrong?" I asked. He wouldn't explain, just repeated, "Come back and you'll see." Something in his voice, a strange edge I couldn't read, made it impossible to refuse. I drove through the night, snow coming down in thick, silent sheets. The radio turned low to keep my thoughts from eating me alive. When I stepped into that house again, the dread in my chest felt like chains pulling me under. My father was right where I'd left him, slumped in the armchair with a whiskey bottle, his eyes bloodshot, my mother looming nearby, arms crossed like a sentry. "Kevin," my father began, voice gravelly, "sit down. I've got something to say." I didn't sit, but he went on anyway, taking a long pull from his whiskey. "Preston Owens, my friend, he's got a proposition," he slurred. "His daughter, Natalie, needs a husband, and I think you're the perfect choice." I froze, like he'd slapped me across the face. Preston Owens was one of my father's old high school friends, a good man with a farm outside Havenfield. I'd heard Natalie's story, how a car accident had left her paralyzed, how she almost never left the house anymore. But marry her? My hands were shaking. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, anger boiling through my chest. My father gestured vaguely, as if it were obvious. "You'll marry her. You'll be taken care of. It's a good match." My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "I'm not marrying anyone. I have my own life. And I already have Sienna as my girlfriend." My father sneered at me like I'd said something laughable, some childish nonsense. "Sienna? That girl's not for you, Kevin." He spat, leaning forward, eyes glassy. "Preston promised us, $500,000 if you marry Natalie." I felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. 500,000. My father kept talking, waving the bottle around. "Think about it, boy. With that money, we could turn our lives around. Don't you want your brothers to have a better life?" My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear him. 500,000. Not because I wanted it, but because I couldn't believe he was willing to sell me for it. "You're insane." I managed, my voice low but sharp. "I'm not doing it. I love Sienna." I turned to my mother, hoping, praying she'd say something, that she'd defend me, but she just kept staring at the floor, her lips pressed together like a sealed envelope. "Kevin," she finally said, her voice soft but slicing through me, "you owe this family. Your father and I raised you, and now you dare turn your back on us? You think you're better than us just because you've got a college degree?" Her words cut straight through the old scars in my chest. Then I heard steps on the stairs. Dylan, thin and pale, came down, eyes wide. "Kevin, don't listen to them," he said, voice shaking. "You don't have to do this." My father's head snapped around, rage flashing in his face. "Shut up, Dylan. This isn't your business." I stepped between them, raising my hand, my eyes locked on my father's. "Don't touch him," I warned, and for the first time ever, I saw him pause, hesitate. But then he laughed, a horrible twisted sound, like rusted metal. "You'll agree, Kevin," he growled. "You always do what I say, don't you?" I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. That night, I drove to a cheap motel on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed outside the dirty window, and I sat on the sagging bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. I didn't sleep. I just kept seeing Sienna's face, hearing her laugh, remembering the way she looked at me like I was someone worth loving. But I also saw Dylan, saw Logan, trapped in that rotting house. $500,000 could get them out. Get them free. I hated myself for even thinking about the money, for even letting the thoughts stick to me like oil. Morning came, gray and lifeless. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking, ready to call Sienna, to tell her everything. But before I could, it rang. Her name flashed on the screen. I answered, "Desperate Sienna?" Her voice was flat, cold. "Kevin, I want to break up." I felt the world collapse beneath me. "What? Sienna, what did I do? Tell me what I did wrong." "You're not the right man for me," she said, her tone sharp, almost rehearsed. "And your parents, I don't like them either." The words were like shards of glass driving into my chest. "Sienna, please," I begged, voice cracking, "just tell me why. I can fix it. I swear I can fix it." There was a pause, then a sigh, so quiet I almost missed it. "I'm sorry, Kevin," she said, and hung up. Just like that, for years were gone, leaving only silence and confusion. I don't even remember how I drove back to my apartment in Denver. I only remember the emptiness, like someone had carved out a hole in my chest with a dull knife. Sienna had been my light, the person who made me believe I could actually escape my past, and now she was gone. When I walked back into my apartment, it was empty, cold, and hollow. Her things were gone, like she'd never even existed. I sank to the floor and stared at the spot where we used to sit together, where we dreamed of a better future. Then I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I opened a cheap bottle of whiskey I'd been given as a housewarming gift, still unopened in the cabinet. That day, I drank it like I wanted to end everything, like the burn could drown my pain. The days after were no better. Each morning, I dragged myself to work, an empty shell, putting on a smile for my coworkers, pretending. Evenings, I came home and drank until the night turned black and dreamless, until I couldn't even remember what I'd lost. About a month of that, living like my father, was enough. One night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes bloodshot, face gaunt, and something inside me cracked. I had to change. I had to do something. So I went back to Havenfield. Not because I wanted to, but because I had nothing left to lose. My father had everything set up by the time I got there. Preston Owens showed up at our house with his daughter, Natalie, wheeling herself carefully into our dingy living room. Preston thanked me over and over, talking about the money, about how Natalie needed someone steady. I barely heard him. It felt like I was watching a movie. I was there, but not really there. Natalie sat quietly, her black hair tied back in a neat braid, brown eyes wary and sharp, studying me like she was trying to figure me out. She didn't smile. She only said a polite hello when we were introduced. Later, when we were left alone in that stuffy room, she looked right at me. "I don't want to force you," she said, her voice calm, though I heard a deep, aching sadness in it. "If you don't want this, just say no." For a split second, I wanted to. I wanted to run. But the image of Dylan and Logan came crashing into my head, the way they'd looked at me that night, still stuck in that house. I swallowed hard. "I'll marry you," I said. Natalie nodded, like we'd just signed a contract neither of us wanted. The wedding happened a week later in a small, cold church that smelled of old stone and wax. I wore an old suit that didn't quite fit. Natalie wore a simple white dress, beautiful in its quiet way. There were no flowers, no music, just the greedy eyes of my parents and Preston counting their prize. Dylan stood in the corner, his face pale, watching me with so much pain I couldn't bear to meet his eyes. When the priest asked if I took Natalie to be my wife, my throat almost closed up. I wanted to scream no, to shout that I loved Sienna, that I didn't want this, that this wasn't me. But I heard myself say, "I do." And that was that. Afterward, Natalie and I moved into a small house Preston rented on the outskirts of Denver. It was clean, quiet. She read books most days, tucked in the corner of the living room with the sunlight on her hair. I threw myself into work at the mineral company downtown, taking on as many shifts as they'd give me, desperate to stay busy. I didn't resent Natalie. She wasn't to blame. But there was nothing between us except an agreement, a silent, constant understanding. At night, lying on the couch because I couldn't bring myself to share a bed, I thought of Sienna, wondering where she was, why she'd left, what I'd done wrong. Those questions were like ghosts, whispering to me in the dark, and I didn't know how to escape them. The house we lived in was a modest single-story place, its cream-colored walls faded and stained with time, the creaky wooden floors complaining under every step. There was a small living room, a cramped kitchen, and one bedroom, which I gave to Natalie. I slept on the couch, covering myself with a thin blanket that barely kept the cold away, staring up at the ceiling in the dark until sleep finally dragged me under. At first, we were strangers sharing a roof. I left for work before dawn and came home late, exhausted. When I was home, I buried myself in geology reports at the kitchen table or wrote letters to Dylan and Logan, pretending I still had a purpose beyond surviving. Natalie stayed mostly in her room, the door slightly ajar, a soft golden light spilling out from her desk lamp. I'd sometimes hear the quiet rustle of pages turning, the only sound that reminded me she was there at all. She read thick novels, and even science books I wouldn't have expected her to enjoy. It surprised me. Every time I saw her, I felt a strange knot in my chest, guilt, helplessness, something I couldn't name. She hadn't chosen this, just like I hadn't. But there she was, sitting in that wheelchair, her hair tied back neatly, her sharp brown eyes fixed on me like she was waiting for a sign, a word, anything. I wanted to say I'm sorry, to tell her I didn't hate her, that I just didn't know how to live inside this strange, broken thing we'd been forced into. But every time I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat, afraid they might break me. Natalie, though, seemed untouched by the awkward silence. She had a stillness that was almost unsettling, a quiet calm I both admired and feared. About 3 weeks after the wedding, I came home late from work, rain dripping off me like a broken faucet. She was in the living room, a book on astrophysics open across her knees. "You should dry off," she said, her voice steady but not unkind, "or you'll catch a cold." I nodded, too tired to argue, and grabbed a towel from the kitchen to wipe myself down. When I came back, she was still watching me, calm and patient. "You don't have to avoid me, Kevin," she said plainly. "I know you don't want to be here, but we could at least try to talk, couldn't we?" Her words felt like a gentle punch, knocking the breath from me. I sank into the chair across from her, leaving a cautious space between us. "I'm not avoiding you," I mumbled, knowing it was a lie. "I just don't know where to start." Natalie nodded, like she'd expected that. "Then start with something simple," she suggested, closing her book. "What do you do at the mineral company?" "My dad said you're a geologist." Her curiosity caught me off guard. No one besides Sienna had ever asked about my work with genuine interest. I took a breath, hesitating, then started talking, slowly at first, explaining how I analyzed rock samples, looking for signs of lithium or cobalt that might make or break a mine. Natalie listened, really listened, nodding thoughtfully, then asking, "How do you know where to look for those? Isn't the earth always changing?" I found myself leaning forward, surprised by how much I wanted to answer her. "Yeah, it changes, but there are patterns, faults, deposits, ways the rock layers fold," I explained, gesturing with my hands. "We use surveys, soil tests, and sometimes satellite data to narrow down the target zones." Her eyes lit with a spark of interest, and she asked, "But doesn't mining hurt the land? I mean, all that blasting and digging." She paused, tilting her head, her tone gentle but steady. "What about the environmental impact of mining?" I realized, sitting there that night, how intelligent Natalie truly was, but more than that, she was passionate about learning. It reminded me of how I'd been as a kid, burying my face in geology books, dreaming of escaping through knowledge. That night, we talked until long after the streetlights outside had come on, and for the first time since we moved in, the house didn't feel like a prison. It became a routine after that. Every evening, once dinner plates were cleaned away, we'd gather in the living room. I told her stories about field trips to the Rockies, about the day I found a quartz crystal in college that shone like a trapped star. She shared pieces of her own past, how she used to run through her father's fields before the accident. "I can't run anymore," she told me once, her voice so calm it startled me, "but I learned to love other things. Books, the sky, ideas." I watched her as she spoke, seeing a strength in her that made me ashamed of how brittle I'd been. She'd lost so much, yet still found ways to live. Why couldn't I do the same? But it wasn't easy, not every day. There were days I came home heavy with memories of Sienna. I still saw her in my dreams, her bright smile, the warmth of her hand in mine as we walked beneath a fading sunset. I wondered if she'd moved on, if she was happy, if she ever thought of me the way I still thought of her. On those days, I couldn't talk. Natalie would try, gently asking about my day, and I'd give her short, clipped answers. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't angry, just quietly understanding, like she knew I was wrestling something I couldn't name. Then one afternoon, about 3 months after the wedding, I found a notebook on the kitchen table. I picked it up, meaning to move it aside, but curiosity pulled me in. Inside were Natalie's careful, neat notes about stars, constellations, complicated equations I couldn't even begin to follow. At the very end, she'd written, "Everything has a reason, even if we don't see it yet." I closed the notebook, feeling like I'd stepped into something private, something sacred. But her words kept echoing in my mind. I wanted to believe that there was meaning in all this, in losing Sienna, in this marriage, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. That fall, Natalie surprised me. She rolled her wheelchair to the sliding door leading to the backyard, a sad little patch of weeds and dried earth. "I want to plant flowers," she told me, eyes bright, voice filled with a hope I hadn't heard in a long time. "Will you help me?" I hesitated. "I don't know anything about gardening," I admitted, scratching my neck. She smiled, a bit mischievous. "That's okay. I'll teach you." So that weekend, we worked side by side, or more like, I worked and she directed. I dug up the stubborn earth while she read instructions from a seed packet, her laughter breaking through whenever I messed up. At one point, I tried to carry a heavy bag of fertilizer, lost my grip, and dumped half of it across the grass. "You're a disaster, Kevin," she teased, shaking her head, laughing so hard I couldn't help but laugh too. By the end of the day, my hands were brown with dirt, and there was a smudge of mud on her cheek. Without thinking, I leaned forward and wiped it off. For a moment, her eyes locked on mine, so gentle, so warm it made something in me tighten, and I had to look away, embarrassed. Moments like that, soft, unguarded, began to change me. I realized I looked forward to coming home, to seeing Natalie, to hearing her talk about a new book or tease me for my clumsy cooking. She had a way of making things lighter, as if she carried sunlight inside her, refusing to let darkness win no matter how unfair life had been. One summer evening, when I was 27, we sat in the backyard together, the first daisies blooming around us, their petals catching the pale evening light. The sky was clear, full of stars, and Natalie pointed up with wonder in her voice. "That's Orion," she said, tracing the constellation with her finger. There was so much excitement in her eyes, it made me smile. "Do you ever think about how small we are? All those stars, billions of years old, and we're just a moment." I watched her, her black hair shining like polished obsidian in the moonlight, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't think of Sienna. I thought of Natalie, of how she made me want to live, not just go through the motions of breathing. "Maybe we're small," I said, glancing up at the endless night sky, "but this moment, it's big enough for me." She smiled at that, and something in my chest loosened. I didn't know when I had started loving Natalie. Maybe it was the way she smiled through the daisies. Maybe it was how she listened to me vent about bad days at work without judgment. Or maybe it was how she didn't need me to save her. She was stronger than I'd ever imagined. She needed a partner, not a hero. This love was different from what I'd had with Sienna. With Sienna, love had been a wildfire, bright and overwhelming, burning fast. With Natalie, it was a steady flame, small but certain, warming me through even the coldest parts of myself. Then, one day, as Natalie and I were eating a simple dinner, roast chicken I'd managed not to burn for once, the doorbell rang. I got up to answer, wiping my hands on a towel, and when I opened the door, my heart stopped. Sienna was standing there. Her brown hair was shorter now, framing her face. Her blue eyes were brimming with regret, and her hands trembled at her sides. "Kevin," she breathed, voice cracking, "we need to talk." I just stood there, frozen, as if the world had rewound years in a second. From the dining table, I saw Natalie watching us. Her eyes weren't jealous, they were worried, as though she was afraid this would shatter everything we'd built. I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me, the evening air biting against my skin. Sienna took a breath so deep it made her shoulders shake. "Out here," she said quietly. I nodded, heart pounding, and followed her onto the small porch. She gripped the railing like she needed it to stand, tears welling up. "Kevin, I need to tell you the truth," she began, voice raw. I didn't move. "Your parents," she continued, swallowing hard. They paid me to leave you. They told me if I broke up with you, they'd give me money to start over." It felt like the porch shifted under my feet, the world tilting. "I agreed," she went on, tears spilling freely now. "I agreed because I thought you'd be better off without me. But they never kept their promise, and I couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Her words cut through me, sharp as a blade. I stumbled backward, my hand catching the railing before I fell. "They paid you." I managed to choke out, my voice breaking like thin ice. Sienna nodded, shame etched into every line of her face, tears streaking her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Kevin," she whispered. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but you need to know the truth." I wanted to scream, to get in the car and drive straight to Havenfield, to stand in front of my parents and ask why they'd chosen to burn down everything good in my life, why they'd poisoned me, even after I'd left. But I didn't. I just stood there, looking at Sienna, seeing the guilt carved into her face, and I realized something that made my chest ache. I didn't love her anymore. Not because I was angry, but because my heart now belonged to the woman inside that house, the woman who had sat across from me night after night, listening, forgiving, seeing me. I swallowed hard and met Sienna's tearful gaze. "I forgive you," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true or just words. She nodded, her shoulders collapsing with relief, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, a chapter of my life finally closing, then stepped back into the house. Natalie was still sitting at the dining table, her eyes gentle but searching, trying to read me. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I walked over, sat down beside her, and for the first time, I reached out and took her hand, feeling her warmth steady me. "I'll be okay," I told her, voice quiet but certain, "because I have you." Her smile in that moment was soft, honest, and I knew I'd finally found what I had spent my whole life looking for, a real family. But life, as I'd come to learn, had a habit of taking sharp turns when you least expected it. One October morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. When I picked up, it was Natalie's mother. Her voice shook so badly, I almost couldn't understand her. "Kevin," she said, fighting for control, "your father-in-law. Preston. He passed away last night. Heart attack." The words felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. "Preston Owens." That tough, kind, stubborn farmer who'd helped arrange this marriage, maybe imperfectly, but with a father's desperate hope of protecting his daughter. I never blamed him. If anything, I'd grown to understand him better than anyone. After I hung up, I paced the living room, wondering how to break it to Natalie. When I told her, she didn't cry. Instead, she sat there quietly in her wheelchair, clutching her astrophysics book against her chest, her expression frozen and calm in a way that scared me. I sat down next to her, helpless. "Natalie," I started, but she interrupted, her voice so steady it made me ache. "Dad always wanted me to live well," she said. "He wasn't perfect, but he believed in me." I nodded and took her hand again, the only comfort I could offer, and together we navigated that heavy, unfamiliar grief. Preston's funeral was on a gray, drizzly day, at a modest cemetery behind his old farm. Natalie laid a bouquet of daisies on his casket, her hand steady even as the rain fell around us. Watching her, I silently promised that she would never feel alone, not as long as I was breathing. When the will was read a week later, Natalie learned Preston had left her a plot of land near the Rockies, on the outskirts of Colorado, rocky, wild, mostly worthless by most people's measure. A place he'd bought for almost nothing, hoping to build a family home someday. Everyone in Havenfield thought it was a fool's purchase. Too far, too dry, too rugged. But to me, standing there with Natalie, it felt like possibility, something unfinished. We didn't make any plans for it right away. Daily life kept us busy, and I was buried in a new project at work, analyzing data from a lithium mine out in Nevada. But fate has a way of tugging you toward what you're meant to face. One weekend, I suggested we go see the land. Partly to satisfy my own curiosity, partly because Natalie and I needed a break from the city. So we packed up, left Denver behind, and took the winding roads that led us through miles of empty prairie until the world opened up, rugged, raw, a stretch of harsh beauty where grass grew thin and gray rocks rolled down into the valley, all beneath the silent watching mountains. Natalie sat beside me in the passenger seat, gazing out the window as the car rolled across that rugged land. Her eyes were distant, a trace of amusement in her voice as she finally spoke. "Dad called this place his pipe dream," she said, a soft laugh at the edge of her words. "He thought it would be worth something someday." Nobody believed him. I laughed too, shaking my head. "Looked like just another patch of rock and weeds to me," I admitted. But the moment I stepped out of the car, something tugged at my instincts. Years of studying the earth had trained my eyes, my hands, my gut. There was a shimmer in a small fragment of stone near the tire tracks, a metallic glint catching the sunlight. I bent down, picking it up, rolling it in my fingers. Heavier than it should have been. My pulse kicked up. I started walking, scanning the ground, collecting other bits of stone, scratching the soil. These weren't just pebbles. Back in Denver, I brought the samples straight to the company lab. For a week, I barely slept, watching every reading come back, verifying again and again, my hands shaking as the numbers added up. Lithium. Enough to power millions of batteries, to change lives, to change everything. The following Monday, I practically flew home, the papers clutched in my hands, my heart a drum in my chest. Natalie was in the backyard, carefully tending the daisies, sunlight glinting off her dark hair. "Natalie," I called, my voice breaking with excitement. "You need to see this." She looked up, startled, as I nearly dropped to my knees in front of her, spreading charts and lab reports across the grass. "Look," I told her, breathless. "It's lithium. This land, your father's land. It's worth hundreds of millions, maybe more." Her brown eyes went wide, darting over the figures I was pointing to, then back to my face. And then, to my surprise, she laughed, a bright, pure laugh that rang out over the flowers, spilling into the late afternoon air. "Dad really had a dream," she said, voice half shaken, half proud. "He always told me this land was special. I thought it was just talk, but he knew, didn't he?" I laughed with her, a deep, bubbling relief that felt like sunlight breaking through every dark part of me. "He knew," I said, nodding, grinning so wide my face hurt. I pulled her in, hugging her, dirt still clinging to her hands from the daisies. For a moment, we were like kids, giddy and wild with hope. That discovery changed everything. Over the next few months, I worked like a madman, taking the data to the company, to investors, engineers, anyone who would listen. I barely ate, barely slept. My boss, Mr. Harris, studied the samples, then looked at me like he'd seen a star rise in front of him. "Kevin, if you're right," he said, clapping my shoulder. "This is huge." Engineers confirmed the estimates. Mining companies circled. And then, a deal. $250 million plus a stake in future profits. When the day finally came, and the money landed in our bank account, I sat at our tiny kitchen table, staring at the numbers on the laptop, digits so big they didn't feel real. Natalie rolled up beside me, her hand finding mine, lacing our fingers together. Her voice was steady, gentle. "We can do anything, Kevin," she said. "But what do you want?" I looked at her, really looked, seeing every moment we'd survived together. The storms, the empty nights, the fragile hopes. In her eyes, I saw the same quiet stars she loved so much, reflected right back at me. "I want us to be happy," I told her, voice rough with emotion. "Truly happy." We moved to a new house in Boulder, a beautiful two-story place with big windows that looked straight out at the Rockies. Every morning the sun would rise and set the peaks on fire, turning them gold, like something out of a painting. Sometimes I'd stand at those windows with a mug of coffee, just breathing in the quiet, a quiet I'd fought so hard to find. The backyard became Natalie's kingdom. She planted what felt like hundreds of flowers, white daisies dancing in the breeze, towering sunflowers, and lavender whose scent perfumed the entire yard. Watching her there, surrounded by blooms, made me realize how much life she carried inside her, even when the world had tried to limit her. Inside the house, we carved out a corner just for her, a little library nook with shelves made of warm oak, stuffed with novels, science books, and those thick astrophysics texts she adored. I'd catch her there sometimes, deep in thought, pen tapping against her lips, pages scattered around her like wings. She told me she was writing a book, pages full of dreams about the stars, ideas reaching beyond everything that had once confined her. As for me, I kept working at the mineral company, but everything had changed. I'd been promoted to lead a research team focused on sustainable mining. I wanted to make sure that projects like ours, extracting rare resources, didn't destroy the very earth that held them. It mattered to me now, more than I could ever explain, that we left something better behind. Every evening, driving back along those winding Boulder roads, I looked forward to home, to Natalie waiting for me in her library corner, a book on her lap, the flowers leaning toward the setting sun outside. It was the first time in my life I felt I belonged somewhere. The money changed things, yes, but what it really bought was freedom. Freedom to heal, to finally feel like the scars from Havenfield could fade. I sent a large part of the money to Dylan and Logan. That felt right. Dylan, 20 now, had enrolled in engineering at the University of Colorado, his eyes on fire when he talked about bridges and buildings he wanted to design. Logan, 17, had taken up painting, and the colors he put on canvas, bold, fearless, felt like a world he'd always wanted to see but never dared to imagine. I found them an apartment near campus, with big windows facing a quiet park. I wanted them to have light, to never again hear the sound of bottles smashing or angry shouting tearing through the walls. Every time I visited and saw Dylan laughing, or watched Logan leaning over a painting, the tightness in my chest loosened, like I'd kept my promise from that day on the bus when I swore I'd get them out. With Natalie, we dreamed even bigger. We created a foundation in Preston's name, honoring her father, who had unknowingly changed everything. The Preston Foundation was for kids who'd been abandoned, mistreated, forgotten, kids like me. We gave them scholarships, apartments to feel safe, counseling to help them heal. Some days I'd come home and read thank you letters from them, like Mia, 16 years old, who dreamed of becoming a doctor. Each letter was a spark, a tiny fire reminding me that this was the right path, that I was no longer repeating my parents' cycle, but rewriting it. Still, even in all this light, Natalie, Dylan, Logan, there were shadows. They lived in the corners of my mind, waiting. It was winter of 2020 when my phone buzzed at the mineral company, the gray sky outside matching the unease in my stomach. I saw the name flash across the screen, Mom. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reject button, but the boy inside me, the boy who still, against all reason, wanted them to change, made me answer. "Kevin," my mother said, her voice coated in that syrupy sweetness that always meant trouble. "Your father and I want to visit." It's been a long time, hasn't it? My grip tightened around the pencil on my desk. The air in the office felt too heavy. I knew better. I knew they weren't coming to visit. They never did. "I'll arrange something," I said, my voice like ice, before hanging up, cutting off whatever else she was about to say. I pushed my chair back, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door, the only thing on my mind. I need to go home. My mind was in turmoil as I drove home, the winter sun fading behind the mountains, leaving a blue chill in the air. When I stepped through the front door, the smell of lavender from the backyard clung to my clothes, trying to ground me, but my thoughts were spinning. Natalie was in the library, her small sanctuary, finishing the final chapter of her astrophysics book. She looked up immediately when she heard me come in. Her dark eyes studied my face, catching the tension there before I even spoke. "It's your parents again, isn't it?" she asked, her voice quiet, setting her pen down. I nodded, sinking into the armchair across from her, feeling my shoulders sag. I told her everything. The call, my mother's voice, that familiar sweetness that always meant something was coming. Natalie listened the way only she could, fully, silently, like the world around us didn't exist until I was finished. When the words finally stopped spilling out of me, she reached over and took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Kevin," she said, her voice soft but with an edge of steel, "you don't have to see them if you don't want to. You've already given them too much." I looked at her, taking in the calm resolve in her face. She was right. But another part of me, maybe the boy who still wanted answers, or maybe just the man who needed to close the door on all of it, knew I couldn't ignore them forever. "I know," I sighed, "but I have to face them. Not for them, for me." She nodded, understanding, and squeezed my hand. Over the next few days, I reached out to Dylan, needing the whole story before I confronted our parents. When he picked up, his voice was hoarse with anger and something worse, disappointment that still hadn't healed. "They're broke, Kevin," he told me bluntly. "They spent all of Preston's money. A new truck, paid off Dad's gambling debts, blew the rest on vacations and liquor. And now they've heard about the lithium mine. They think you owe them." His bitterness was like acid on my tongue. "I'm not surprised," I said quietly, though the words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Dylan took a shaky breath. "Be careful, okay? They're going to try to break you again." "Yeah," I told him, my voice heavy. "They can't anymore." A week later, they showed up on our doorstep. I'd been expecting it, but still, seeing them there, my father, Spencer, with his disheveled gray hair and bloodshot eyes, and my mother, Mira, wearing a sweater that looked older than I was, fake smile plastered on her lips, it twisted something in my gut. "Kevin, my boy," my father boomed, trying to sound warm, gesturing vaguely at the house. "Nice house. You've done well for yourself." I didn't answer, just stepped back and let them in, leading them to the living room where Natalie waited. She was in her wheelchair, back straight, eyes calm but sharp. She nodded politely to them, then fell silent, leaving me to steer the conversation. The air felt heavy, like the seconds before a storm breaks. My father didn't bother with small talk. He leaned forward, his hands trembling slightly. "Kevin, I heard about that lithium deal. You made a fortune, didn't you? You've got to share with your family. You can't leave us with nothing." My mother jumped in, her voice carefully rehearsed. "You're the eldest son, Kevin. You have a responsibility to us, to your family." Their words were like a recording from my nightmares, echoing all the ways they'd once demanded I hand over every dollar, every ounce of hope I had as a kid. Except this time, I wasn't 15 anymore. I took a breath, feeling my chest tighten, but I didn't let my voice shake. "Mom, Dad," I looked them both in the eyes. "I gave you $500,000 from Preston. You spent it all. I don't owe you anything anymore." My father scoffed, loud and dismissive, like I'd just told him the sky was green. "Who do you think you are, Kevin?" he spat, his voice thick with years of bitterness. "You're rich now, and you turn your back on your family? You wouldn't be anything without me and your mother." My mother jumped in, her voice shaking, maybe from desperation or maybe from practiced guilt. "You can't abandon us like this, Kevin. We're your blood." I stared at them, really stared, and saw not parents but two strangers, hollow and broken by their own greed. Images of my childhood slammed into me. The nights I lay curled up in that splintered room, listening to bottles break, shielding Dylan and Logan from the worst of the shouting. I thought of how they'd stolen my chance at happiness with Sienna, how they'd twisted everything I ever loved. The words burned in my throat, but I had to let them out. "You paid Sienna to leave me," I said, my voice cold enough to slice glass. "You destroyed the best thing in my life back then. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" My father's eyes went wide for a split second, then narrowed, a sneer twisting across his mouth. "That girl wasn't good for you, Kevin. Look at you now. Aren't you living the dream?" My mother dropped her gaze, wringing her hands. Her voice was barely audible. "We just wanted a better future for you." I felt my hands ball into fists, nails digging so hard into my palms they nearly drew blood. A better future? I could feel my voice shaking, barely containing the rage I'd buried for years. "You didn't do it for my future. You did it for the money. You never once thought of me. Only yourselves." There was a pause, like the whole house was holding its breath. Then Natalie spoke, her voice soft, but edged with unshakable steel. "Can't you see?" she said, looking straight at them with eyes that didn't flinch. "Kevin has done everything for this family, even when you treated him terribly. Now he has the right to live his own life." My father turned on her, his face red with rage, about to fire back, but Natalie didn't even blink. Her gaze stayed calm, unbothered, and he looked away like a beaten dog. I looked at her then, gratitude swelling so painfully in my chest I thought it might break me. Natalie, she was my shield, my anchor, everything I never thought I deserved. I stood, my heart pounding like I'd run miles. I pointed to the door. I'm not giving you any more money. I told them, my voice strong, final. Don't come back. I have my family, Natalie, Dylan, and Logan. You're not my family anymore. The words burned coming out, but once they left me, they set me free. My father's face contorted in fury, roaring at me, calling me ungrateful, worthless. But my mother tugged at his sleeve, her eyes hollow with resentment, and pulled him toward the door. When the door slammed shut behind them, the whole house went silent except for my ragged breathing. I stood there, shoulders shaking, like I'd just outrun a monster. Natalie wheeled closer to me, reached for my hand, and held it steady. You did the right thing, she said softly. I fell to my knees, wrapping my arms around her, and for the first time, I let the tears come, not for them, not for loss, but for freedom. And even through the sting of those tears, a strange thought sparked somewhere deep inside me. If my parents hadn't ripped Sienna away, if they hadn't forced me into that marriage with Natalie, I wouldn't have this life, wouldn't have Natalie, wouldn't have the foundation, wouldn't have the peaceful evenings watching the Rockies with the woman who made me whole. I hated what they did, but in a strange way, they led me here. I whispered all of this to Natalie, my voice cracking as if the words themselves were made of glass. She listened, never breaking her calm, and then reached up to brush a loose strand of hair from my forehead. Sometimes the worst things lead us to the best, she said softly, her fingers so warm against my skin it steadied my heart. But you don't owe them thanks, Kevin. You built this life yourself. I closed my eyes, breathing in the truth of that, letting it settle in a place inside me that had always felt unfinished. Looking back on everything, the twisted road from Havenfield to Boulder, I could see it wasn't a straight path. It was a labyrinth, full of shadows and turns, valleys so deep I thought I'd never climb out. I remembered every scar my parents left, their rage, their neglect, the day they shattered my future with Sienna and forced me into something I never wanted. Those wounds, I realized, would never truly fade. They had shaped me, carved lines into my soul that I would carry forever. But then I looked at Natalie, at the way she met the world, even from her chair, with courage and curiosity, and I saw those scars differently. They weren't just damage. They were a map, a guide that had led me, somehow, to this woman, to our wild garden overflowing with daisies, to quiet evenings with stars overhead, to laughter and peace. If they hadn't forced me to marry you, I told her quietly, I wouldn't have this life. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have learned what love can really be. Natalie smiled, her eyes glimmering in that way that made me feel seen, really seen. And if they hadn't destroyed what you had with Sienna, she added gently, you might have lived something easier. But maybe not something this meaningful. I nodded, swallowing hard. I don't thank them, I said, the words bitter but honest. They don't deserve that. But I accept, in fate's strange way, the worst things led me to the best. Natalie squeezed my hand, letting me feel all of her strength through that simple touch. And I thought, if I could talk to that 15-year-old boy again, the one curled up in a broken bed listening to his parents fight, I'd tell him, keep going. Don't give up. The darkest days will lead you to light, but you have to keep moving, even when you're afraid. And if I had advice for anyone else reading this story, anyone trying to survive a toxic family or wrestling with wounds no one else could see, I'd say this. You are not what others do to you. You are what you choose to become. Find people who truly love you, no matter how rare they are. Take opportunities, even the smallest ones. Trust that the road, however long, will lead you to light. Because I found it. I found the light. Life doesn't promise to be easy, but it promises to be worth living if you have the courage to keep going. And I, Kevin Martin, kept going. I built a true family, built a life rooted in love and truth, and I will never stop dreaming bigger and brighter. Because I know, as Natalie once told me, each of us is a story. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.